I call that they don't like to see you winning. They wanna see you in a penitentiary. I need me a little baby who gon' listen. Girl, I don't wanna be the one you ignorant. My mama told me, boy, make a decision.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Clutch Talk podcast / YouTube / We Do It All. As always, I am your host, John. Very happy to be here. My boy Jay Hiz over there in the 6. How you doing, baby?
Chilling, man, chilling. I'm my Grizzly, like I'm Jay Hill, man. I'm John.
Yes, sir. You are your Grizzly, man. But hey, let me holler at my boy over there in the 714. Junior, what's up, baby?
What's going on, man? I'm excited to get onto this Grizzly Talks. Probably one of the most electrifying young teams in the league. I mean, I feel like every season they're like everybody's second team. You know, they're like, so no one dislikes the Grizzlies as far as I know. So excited to talk about them and just continue to see them grow.
Man, and you said it best. I am so excited to get into this Grizzlies episode, especially because of the amazing guests that we have on the show today, man. We have the site manager of the Grizzly Bear Blues, Joe Mullinax. Joe, we are so happy to have you on. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself to the fans, talk a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, you're very kind. I really appreciate that. I'm Joe Mullinax. I'm the site manager of SB Nation's GrizzlyBearBlues.com. I've been doing this for far too long. I think I'm going into my 5th or 6th year. I can't even remember anymore, running the site. And, it's been an interesting rise up the blogger ranks. I was a commenter over at GBB years ago, a decade ago now. And, just kind of went up from being a writer to a podcaster and writer to the guy that runs the site. And, we have a staff of about 15 writers over there now. And, I'm very proud of the team we've built over at GrizzlyBearBlues.com. I think we got a lot of talented folks. And, in my day job, I am a high school football coach. So I'm in my busiest time of the year, and I haven't written as much lately. But thankfully, the team, Parker Fleming, Brandon Abraham, Nate Chester, Justin Lewis, Sean Coleman. I've got lots of folks that I could go up and down the list that have kind of carried my dead weight for the last month or so. But, I looked up and the off season's over. We're 3 weeks away from preseason opening, and it's time to get back into Grizzlies talk. So I'm excited to do that with you guys.
Exactly, man. We got some great Grizzlies talk to get into today. And Joe, don't undercut yourself, man. You got some great work on those articles, man. We'll talk about that. We'll go ahead and get into that, man. But Joe, the first question that we love to start off these fan series with is, Joe, as a Grizzlies fan, are you content with the way the year went?
Yes, I am. And maybe that is not the right answer for most Grizzlies fans because, I think folks very often, have a championship or bust mentality or, maybe not a championship, but, you make the playoffs, you want to compete, you want to get to the second round. And I'm just very aware of where this team is. Their best player is Ja Morant, and he's 22 years old. How many NBA teams have won the championship with their best player being a 22-year-old? Not many, if any. So if you're looking at it through that lens and you understand that even though they are competing as a playoff team or a play-in team that won the play-in and made the playoffs, they're not going to get much beyond that in the here and now because their best player is 22 years old. Their second best player is 22 years old, and Jaren Jackson Jr. He may not even be 22 yet. He might still be 21. I think he has a September-October birthday. But anyway, the fact remains their best players are young. Their best years are to come. And the Memphis Grizzlies are setting themselves up to be good when LeBron James is not around anymore, when Steph Curry is making $60 million as a 37-year-old point guard, when Kawhi Leonard is washed in theory. Father Time is undefeated. And, all these players are great and they're NBA title contenders now. But in the next 4 years, what is the Western Conference going to look like? It's the Dallas Mavericks, the New Orleans Pelicans, and I would argue the Memphis Grizzlies. Those are the three teams that are going to be in that hunt to be the next Western Conference representative once the current guard is eliminated. And they are looking to that. And that is hard for fans to stomach. The trade of Jonas Valanciunas for Steven Adams. You could easily argue the Grizzlies got worse. The selection of Zaire Williams. He's not ready to compete and be an NBA rotation player right now. He has a lot of work to do. but they have done things to put themselves in a position that if Zaire Williams hits in the next 2 years and he becomes a third star level player, the ceiling for the Grizzlies just went a lot higher. And that's a lot higher of a ceiling than they would have had if they held on to Jonas Valanciunas. So everything that Zach Kleiman, the GM of the Grizzlies, and that front office does is with an eye to a time that is 2 or 3 years down the road. And in our instant gratification society, that is not something that people stomach very well. But if you understand that Ja Morant is young and Jaren Jackson Jr. is young, and you better believe that especially Ja is in this conversation with this front office in terms of the moves that they're making. As long as Ja Morant is cool with it, if you're going to build a championship team in Memphis, Tennessee, it's through the NBA draft and it's through trades. It's not through free agency. And it takes time to build a team in that way. And that's where they are. If they make the playoffs, that's awesome. They're not going to actively be as bad as they can be, but they're also not going to sacrifice the future for the here and now. And I think that can be frustrating at times, but it can also be, satisfying in a way that you can truly just enjoy watching a young team learn and grow and develop together.
Yeah, Joe, all the questions that we've asked for all the fans for these team interviews, we always ask, are you content with how the year went? And I have to be honest, like that was the best answer, because most people say no, I'm not content. No, I'm not content because we didn't win a championship. But for you to have that lens on that, I understand that my best player is 22 and 21. We aren't expected to win a championship right now. And for what we did, I'm very happy. So, I like for you to even have that lens, shows your knowledge on your knowledge on the game. And that's big. But a question that
in fairness, sorry to cut you off. In fairness, I used to have that same lens. In fairness to fans, that you got to try to win a championship. You got to try to win a championship. You got to try to win a championship. But the core 4 Grizzlies changed my perspective on that. Were the core 4 Grizzlies a failure because Zach Randolph and Tony Allen and Mike Conley and Marc Gasol didn't win an NBA championship? Of course they weren't. That was one of the most fun experiences I've ever had in sports, period, following that team, much less as a fan. I'm actively in sports my entire life. And I would rank that grit and grind Grizzlies run as one of my favorite sports memories in my entire sports-centered life. So, of course, it wasn't a failure that they didn't win a championship. Only one team can win the title. It's about the journey that you go on and the way that team grows and develops. And I think that your goal is to win a title, especially in professional sports. But especially in a city like Memphis, if you don't enjoy the story, if you don't enjoy the process of getting to know those players and watching them develop and watching them, become, especially in the case of Ja Morant, becoming a father in the city and, becoming a fully grown man. He was 19 when he arrived. I think that there's things that we kind of lose in the weeds of searching for a championship. And the core 4 Grizzlies really brought that through for me.
Yeah, and you talk about the journey of the season and how that's so important, and that I actually want to touch on that. I want to touch on the journey that the Grizzlies just had this past season, and that was you guys landing the 8th seed, and for the play-in tournament, you guys beat 2 teams with tons of playoff experience in the Spurs and the Warriors, which honestly is hats off to you guys, because like how you said in the beginning of this pod, like your best players are 21 and 22. So clearly not much experience, let alone playoff experience. And you guys go in and you guys are able to handle a team like the Warriors, and handle a team like the Spurs. And then you guys go on to face the number 1 seed, the Utah Jazz, which leads me right to my next question.
And still give it to them for 1 game too.
And still, exactly. Yeah. And still give
without
it to
Donovan Mitchell. We have to be fair. Without Donovan Mitchell.
So that's exactly my next question to you. Joe, the word around the NBA when you guys were playing the Jazz, or before the series started, was the Grizzlies might upset them because the Jazz aren't the real number 1 seed because, COVID, a lot of people didn't really believe in the Jazz. Donovan Mitchell had his injury, like how you mentioned. But I want to know, from a Grizzlies fan, like, how did you feel coming into that series? Did you feel confident, or did you know in the back of your head, like, hey, man, like, I don't think this is it?
I had Jazz in 6th, I believe. And, obviously it wound up being Jazz in 5. The Grizzlies weren't in a position to compete with a fully healthy Utah Jazz team. Like, that was a really good Utah Jazz team. Mike Conley was the third best player on that team, and he was an all-star, So I think that, and obviously Grizzlies fans are very familiar with what Mike Conley is capable of. So I think that it was realistic to say they were going to win at least one game because, again, Mitchell's health was a question, and you had to look at the reality of the Grizzlies playing really well. You can't discount the value of momentum, especially for a young team. And I think that really helped them in that first game, along with the absence of Mitchell. But the Jazz were the superior team. And usually in a 7-game series, the best team wins. So that's exactly how it played out. And again, some folks might have been disappointed. I was just thrilled that they got there. They were the first team in NBA history to win the play-in tournament, essentially, because they were the 9 seed. In a normal year, the Memphis Grizzlies wouldn't have made the playoffs, but they were the first team to take advantage of that 9 seed opportunity and sneak in. And, that they, again, are one of the youngest teams in the NBA. So that was invaluable experience. Those are well-worn scars, well-earned scars in postseason play that are going to pay off as the team tries to be more competitive in the future in the years to come.
Definitely. So Joe, let's start to transition onto one of the most recent news over there in Memphis, and that's the huge 3-team trade between you guys, the Pelicans, and the Hornets, which landed you guys Steven Adams and Eric Bledsoe, and like how you mentioned the draft rights to Zaire Williams at the 10th pick. But you guys had to give up the monster in Jonas Valanciunas, and I read your article on who you think won the trade, and I absolutely agree with you, Joe. I think that as of right now, this is more of a downgrade for the Grizzlies because Jonas Valanciunas is the best player in this trade. But you can make an argument that the Grizzlies planning for the future it is them winning in this trade, because like how you said, they understand that their best players are 21 and 22. So let's just plan for the future. There's no point of going against the Lakers. We're not going to beat the Lakers right now. We're not going to beat a Nuggets right now. So my question to you, Joe, is for someone that would say, no, the Pelicans won the trade, what would you say to that?
It depends. We talked about lenses earlier, right? It depends on the lens you look at it through. Jonas Valanciunas is a better basketball player than Steven Adams. Anybody who tries to say that he's not is wrong. Jonas is a better player. But again, Zaire Williams raises the ceiling for the Grizzlies. If he hits, he could flame out. He may not be any good. That's possible. Clearly, the Grizzlies don't think that's the case, and they thought it was worth losing out on the high floor of Jonas Valanciunas to take a swing at the fence for Zaire Williams. If Zaire Williams works, he's that third star. He's that third key player that they have under team control for the next 8 or 9 years that they can build a championship contender around. And you weren't going to get that with Jonas Valanciunas. Jonas Valanciunas as your second best player, that's a team that probably is the 8th seed in the Western Conference. And that's not a bad thing, especially if you are the New Orleans Pelicans, who is feeling pressure to win now. And I think that that's an underrated part of this that people don't talk about, or maybe not talk about as much. The Pelicans feel pressure to win now. Whether these Zion Williamson rumors are substantial or not, they exist. And usually where there's smoke, there's at least a little bit of a flicker of flame. And there's a possibility that, Zion's not happy. He wants them to compete. The Grizzlies are competing, doing exactly what they're doing. So John Morant does not have that same level of frustration. He doesn't have that same level of concern in terms of being in the playoffs right now, because he's already seeing success with how this Grizzlies front office is doing things. So Zion hasn't had a chance to experience that yet. And I think they just have different perspectives on their organizations. And I don't necessarily think Zion's wrong. Again, like we talked about earlier, you play to win the game, like Herm Edwards once famously said. But the Grizzlies are able to do that with their eye on the future. So that keeps Ja happy. The Pelicans have underachieved in the short time that Zion has been in New Orleans. He wants that to change. I think the Pelicans will make the playoffs this year. I think that they will likely take the place of the Memphis Grizzlies. I could see the Grizzlies making the play-in, but not making the playoffs. And if that happens, there's going to be a lot of pissed off people in Memphis thinking that they lost the trade. But as you alluded to, it's not about right now. There doesn't always have to be a loser in trades. I think both teams have different views of where they are in terms of their current situations, and they both could win. The Pelicans can make the playoffs, and if they do, with Jonas Valanciunas as their third or fourth best player, then it was a successful trade. If the Grizzlies get something out of Zaire Williams and he shows growth throughout the season, and maybe they miss out on the playoffs, but they have a lot of faith in what Zaire could be as that wing third man, then it was a successful trade for the Grizzlies. And they have their eyes on a road that leads them further down than this season. So there's not necessarily a right or wrong, and there's not necessarily a winner or a loser. It's about what do these teams value? The Grizzlies value the long view. The Pelicans want to be in the playoffs a little bit sooner, I think, or at least make a push to make it look like they're trying to do that. And acquiring Jonas Valanciunas does that. He is an upgrade over Steven Adams. And for the Grizzlies, now they get to see what Jaren Jackson Jr. is made of. Now they get to see what this offense looks like without their security blanket that is Jonas Valanciunas. So in my opinion, it's a win-win. I don't think the Pelicans lost by any stretch, but I also think the Grizzlies won too, because they have different perspectives on their current situations.
So let me ask you a question really quick, Joe. As far as when you were talking about the playoffs, you did mention you have the Pelicans finishing over the Grizzlies this season. And is that where do you get this prediction from? Is it because you think, is it Zion versus Ja? Is it the supporting cast? Where do you get the Pelicans finishing ahead of the Grizzlies?
Well, I think the Pelicans are going to be more motivated to do the things necessary to win now. Like the Pelicans could give up first round picks, which they obviously have plenty from, or at least maybe not as many as they used to, but they still have assets from the Anthony Davis trade. I think that they're going to be willing to part with things that will make them better in this next 12 months than the Grizzlies are. You know, It's possible Memphis tries to swing for Bradley Beal or Ben Simmons or something like that, but I don't think that's in their time frame. Because again, say Memphis trades for Ben Simmons, and because they have the money and the picks to theoretically do that, and they are able to keep Jaren Jackson Jr. in the process. So you got Ja, Jaren, Ben Simmons. Wow, cool new big three. Where does that put Memphis in the Western Conference? 5,
Probably
6, maybe
5, maybe 6 seed or so.
But you see my point? Like if your long-term goal is to be a championship contender, and if you look at 2025 Western Conference, Luka, of course, Zion, who's the third team? It's Memphis. In my opinion, who else is there in terms of being set up for success in the long term?
So, Joe, you talked about, the Grizzlies and their future, and then the Pelicans and that deal. So let's talk about that a little bit more. So my question for you is, if the Grizzlies, didn't make the playoffs this year, and with Ja and his future, and, with Zion and the Pelicans not making the playoffs, and there's talks obviously of Zion, potentially leaving and not resigning. There's, people in his ear about not resigning. Was that, that deal to, get an upgrade in Valanciunas, was it kind of warranted, and were they kind of pressured into that deal in terms of, the Grizzlies and their success in the playoffs, well, at least making it, and then in terms of the urgency that the Pelicans have?
I could see that. And again, thankfully, I'm not a Pelicans blogger. I'm sure Pelicans fans would agree with that they're glad I'm not a part of their community. And I don't know Zion Williamson. I've never met him, and everything I have is the same reports that you guys are privy to. I think that Zion is a little bit the right way to say this. I think that he's frustrated that the team has not been as successful because they obviously have tried to be competitive. They signed Steven Adams. They signed Eric Bledsoe. They expected those signings to be a lot more successful than they were. And I think that frustrates Zion to think, are they really going in the right direction? Do they know what they're doing? Whereas with the Grizzlies, there's not really a question in that regard. I think that Ja has faith that they know what they're doing because they've had success from the beginning doing what they're doing. Now, again, your definition of success can be making the play-in for 2 straight years, which is what Memphis has done. Is that success to LeBron's Los Angeles Lakers? Of course not. That's an abysmal disaster. If that happened to Kawhi and the Clippers, or Giannis and the Bucks, we would be talking about how those coaches need to be fired and the team needs to be blown up. But they're on different planes. They're on different ways of viewing things in the here and now. And I think the Pelicans are tired of being the butt of the joke in terms of, oh, look at all these national games. Do they really deserve it? Are they really that good? Are they only there because Zion and the media obsession with them? I think that they feel the strain of Zion's stardom, and they understand that they need to get better now. And that's exactly what they did. They did get better now. Like Zaire Williams wouldn't have helped them get better now. Trey Murphy, in terms of providing a specific skill set as a 3-point shooter, potentially versatile wing defender who can play the four a little bit, the guy that they got with the 17th pick, he could potentially help them win more now as a end of rotation wing than Zaire Williams would. But Zaire Williams has the higher ceiling, and that's what the Grizzlies are interested in. They wanted the home run swing. So as an outsider on the Pelicans, I think that they had a desire to get better in realistic ways as best they could. Devontae Graham, Jonas Valanciunas coming in, I think they see those as realistic guys that they could have gotten for relatively cheap in terms of what they were willing to part with in terms of assets. And if they make the playoffs and they have a series against the Jazz or the Lakers, or can you imagine how ESPN would fawn over themselves if it's Zion versus LeBron in the first round? I mean, we would not hear about anything else for 2 weeks. So I think that would appease Zion. I think he would see that their path is improving. The team's getting better in his eyes, and he would be more happy to be a New Orleans Pelican. That doesn't really exist with Ja, that pressure. And, you could talk about personality or the success that the team has had in the first couple of years that those guys have been in the league. And I think it's a combination of all of those factors. But you can't take away the pressure and the weight of having a player like Zion Williamson and the need to try to get better as soon as possible when it comes to that kind of a trade. Because the Pelicans did get better in the here and now. But is Trey Murphy going to be better than Zaire Williams if both players turn out the way they can? No. And now you're talking about long-term positioning as opposed to short-term fixes. I think Jonas Valanciunas is a shortcut to the playoffs. He helped the Grizzlies get to the playoffs, to his credit, and I think he's going to help the Pelicans get there too. But beyond that, I mean, I'm guessing you guys watched the Grizzlies Jazz playoff series.
Yeah.
Jonas Valanciunas is not a playoff player. He's just not. He got picked on in that series time and time again, especially defensively. So there's a good floor. You're a player. He's a good regular season player. He'll probably help New Orleans get to the playoffs. But if the Pelicans fans are expecting some miraculous run with Jonas Valanciunas as their third or fourth best player, they're going to be disappointed. And I think the Grizzlies aren't worried about having that as their floor. They're looking to a higher ceiling.
Yeah.
Right. So
ahead,
Joe, you mentioned so on the conversation and the topic of the future, the Grizzlies obviously got rid of Jonas Valanciunas, who was one of their, premier players this past season and one of their starters. So on that conversation, with arguably two of their best defenders in Kyle Anderson at age 27 and then Dillon Brooks at age 25, what do you think about their future? And if they're looking towards the future and building towards the future, what does that look like with those two players? Because I've read about rumors about them potentially being moved for, and a bigger deal for a star player or, getting assets. So what do you think of Kyle Anderson and Dillon Brooks, two of your premier defenders for the future?
Kyle Anderson getting traded would make more sense than Dillon Brooks, simply because Kyle is an expiring contract. I think the Grizzlies value Kyle. I think Kyle had a most improved player-esque. Obviously, he didn't win the award, and I think it was Julius Randle that won, and he clearly deserved it. But Kyle Anderson was in the top 10 for that, in my opinion, in terms of how much better Kyle got, especially offensively. Kyle's always been a pretty good defender, but Kyle Anderson, the scorer, was a revelation last year compared to what he had been in the past. But we have no idea what his contract's going to be. How much is it going to cost to retain Kyle Anderson? 13 million, 14 million. Is that worth it for a team that, again, Kyle is a veteran. Kyle is in the prime of his career. does it make sense for Kyle Anderson to be on this roster long term? I think you could argue both ways. I don't know that I'm sold either way when it comes to Kyle. As far as Dillon, I would be much more surprised if Dillon Brooks was traded. I think the only way Dillon Brooks gets traded is if like a Ben Simmons or Bradley Beal comes back. And I don't think that's happening, for the record. I'm not doing clickbait here. I don't see either of those guys becoming Grizzlies. So I don't think Dillon Brooks gets traded. I think they value him in terms of the climate that they're building there, the culture that they're establishing. Dillon's one of their leaders. Dillon's one of the guys that they depend on in the bad times, the best defender on the team in terms of being willing to take on the toughest assignment. He's willing to take on offensive burden when it's necessary. He has shown the ability to carry that offense at times. So I believe that they value what Dillon Brooks can be long term more than they do Kyle. I could be off on that, and maybe they go in the opposite direction. And I don't think that they don't value Kyle. They clearly do, because if they didn't, I would say that Kyle would already be gone. I think that they are understanding of their situation, like we've been talking about throughout the show. And I believe that they know that Kyle is probably not going to be on the Grizzlies team that competes for an NBA championship 3 or 4 years from now. If that's the case, then if somebody's offering a first-round pick for him at the trade deadline, why wouldn't you take that offer? But maybe they do see him as one of those key pieces and they keep him around. I think that keeping Kyle always made more sense than keeping Jonas because of Kyle's versatility. Jonas is a very good basketball player, but he's not nearly as versatile as Kyle is. So could Memphis re-sign Kyle? Yeah, I could see that happening. But I also think that there's a price for acquiring the services of Kyle that the Grizzlies would be willing to hear out more so than Dillon.
Yeah, definitely, man. And Joe, while we're along the lines of roster and how it's looking and how the fit is going to work, I want to bring up a point that you brought up on the Grizzly Bear Blues article for all the fans. If you guys haven't checked that out, make sure you guys go check that out. Great articles. So on that article, you mentioned several times that you believe that Steven Adams and Valanciunas are you said it, a memorial bridge for Triple J, for him to have that leap here, for him to be able the security blanket that you mentioned earlier. I wanted to not necessarily pull back on it, but I wanted to challenge you on asking, like, do you not believe yet in Triple J? Because I really like Triple J, and I think that just let him go out there, let him make his mistakes. Like, that's how he is going to become the best version of himself, going out there making all the mistakes and not having a Adams or not having a Valanciunas in front of him to disrupt him. Because I don't know if I can see like a Adams and Triple J 4 and 5 situation. And I also so I don't want to take away too much from Triple J, but then again, Steven Adams, you don't want to just leave him on the bench rotten. He's way better than that, much more value than that. So I just kind of wanted to hear as to how you would want to play that out with that Triple J and Adams at the 4 and 5.
I think Jaren starts at the 4 and Adams starts at the 5, but I don't think that's how games end. I think games will end with Jaren at the 5. And when I say Steven Adams is the Jonas Valanciunas Memorial Bridge, I mean that they're still trying to figure out what Jaren is. Can Jaren be the modern extended big 5 that they want him to be? He has too much foul trouble right now still, and his rebounding is still a question. I think he's gotten better at that, but he's still not as good at it as he needs to be. So Steven Adams alleviates the pressure in those two particular ways. He can eat minutes at the 5. So can Xavier Tillman. Brandon Clark isn't great at it right now, but in theory, Brandon Clark can play the 5 some. And there are guys there that can alleviate some of that pressure on Jaren to be the big man in the middle, or not necessarily in the middle, because obviously Jaren is so perimeter-based offensively. But there's a lot of things with Jaren that he's still working on because of his injuries, because of his youth, his inexperience. And Steven Adams covers some of that up. So I think that the biggest beneficiary of Jonas Valanciunas being gone is going to be Jaren Jackson Jr., because now he is that second offensive option behind John Morant. He has to be. It shouldn't be Dillon Brooks. Dillon Brooks might try to be that guy some nights, but it needs to be Jaren in terms of them trying to sign him long-term and all of those things. So I think that Steven Adams will be the starter at the 5. I don't think he'll finish games at the 5. If Kyle Anderson's still on the team, I think you're looking at, lineups like Ja, Desmond Bain, Zaire Williams, Kyle Anderson, and Jaren. I think that could be a closing lineup you'll see, and just trying to finish games out that way. And it may not be Zaire, it could be somebody else, but I see them prioritizing Jaren as the closer at the 5 and not so much the starter. And it allows for Jaren to stay in the games longer. One of his biggest issues is foul trouble. You want to try to keep him out of that as much as possible so that he's in a position to bring his versatile offensive and defensive games to those closing moments in close contests.
We're going to move to this next segment here, Joe, and what we call it is the Clutch Talk timeout. And usually I ask, who is the go-to player? And unfortunately, being a Warriors fan, I realize, the obvious answer here is Ja Morant. But my question for you is, what would you like to see in terms of his development? Obviously, we've seen that, with his shot, but what is his next step as becoming a star and with the obvious goal of being a superstar and bringing, Memphis, a championship? So what would you like to see from his development?
I would disagree with you a little bit in terms of his ultimate goal being a superstar. I think Ja Morant's ultimate goal is to be a champion. And I think that while people will point to his shooting as something that he needs to get better at, and I agree, and I'm sure Ja agrees too, that he needs to be a better 3-point shooter, I think that he most needs to improve his defense. And I think that it's not fair to ask him to be a Dillon Brooks-esque level defender because he's asked to do so much offensively. But given Ja Morant's frame, he's a 6'3" point guard, given his size, his length, he shouldn't be one of the worst defenders in the NBA. And that is what statistically Ja Morant is right now. He is one of the worst defenders in the NBA. If you're going by, there's a couple of different advanced metrics over at Crashing the Glass, that say that Ja is one of the worst defenders in the league. So he needs to make a jump there. I think that he and Jonas Valanciunas got picked on a lot last season on that end of the floor. And because Jonas, as we kind of alluded to earlier, it was sorry about that. It was all drop coverage all the time. So I think that there's some pros to that and some cons to that, obviously. And Ja kind of bore the brunt of that in that 1-5 pick and roll game. So you're looking at improvement there because Steven Adams is a better defender on the perimeter, especially than Jonas Valanciunas is. But I want to see him be a better defender. I want to see him, not just, gamble and play passing lanes. I want to see him be aggressive over top of screens at times. I want to see him stay in front of his man a little bit better, get his hands up a little bit more consistently, and, take away some points per possession on the defensive end. And that will help the team in terms of winning too. So the popular answer is going to be his shooting, and he does need to make that better. I want to see him be a better defender here in year 3 for him.
And I think that he'll be able to get there too, as far as improving his defense. I mean, he's only in the second or third year in the league. Sure, he's got a little bit more time to develop. But while we're on those lines, though, I did want to ask, and this has become kind of almost like a folklore question, but Ja Marin versus Zion Williamson. I'm sure you prefer Ja. In your views, who's the better player? I know they're a little bit different, so it's hard to compare. It's not like, Luka and Trae Young. But
sure. I think Ja Morant I like Ja Morant better. I think that he doesn't have the star complex that Zion may have. And again, I don't know Zion. That's not fair. It's all hearsay. And, there's Zion wants to go to New York. Zion wants to go to New York. All the memes that are coming about Ja going to LA are created by Lakers fans. Right. You know what I mean? There's not much smoke with that fire.
Right.
I think that you look at Ja Morant and he had a different come up than Zion did. Zion was that prodigal son. He was that guy that was the star. Ja Morant was playing in aux gyms, and discovered by Murray State. He went and played at Murray State, this completely different circumstances. Ja Morant is okay with not being that main guy because he takes it as criticism. He takes it personally and it drives him. And that's very much Memphis's mentality. He is a very Memphis story coming from South Carolina. So I think that he and the city kind of understand each other in that way, in a way that maybe Zion and New Orleans don't.
Right.
So in terms of basketball playing, Zion's a better player. I don't think it makes sense to try to argue. They obviously both do very different things.
Yeah.
But Zion is just superior. I think that's fair to say. But in terms of fit, I think Ja makes a heck of a lot more sense for Memphis. And I think that those two stories kind of fit, like a hand in a glove. And I prefer having Ja on the Grizzlies because of that. I mentioned earlier in the show, I'm interested in the journey. You know what I mean? I want to get to know these guys as best I can, obviously, as a fan. When they win, I want it to mean something, because not just because my team won, but because I was invested in the player.
Yeah.
And I think Ja Morant has invested himself in Memphis. And, Memphis is a place where if you love the city, they'll love you back.
Yeah.
And I think he's already kind of achieved that status going into his third year in the NBA. And, it'll make it that much sweeter if and when that level of success comes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I mean, it's a polarizing debate that goes back and forth a lot. And I genuinely think what Ja does for Memphis, I almost want to say his contributions to Memphis are bigger than what Zion has contributed to New Orleans so far. Granted, Zion has been injured, and it's been a little bit of a different situation there. And also the Pelicans do have a player like Brandon Ingram that they can rely on.
Right.
So it's just different scenarios, but I was curious to see how you'd see it as a Grizzlies fan. So it's a perfect answer.
Sure.
Thanks. And thank you for that, Jenner. We all us and all the fans wanted to know that. Is Zion or Ja, man? So
asking the tough questions.
so look, Joe. This is a topic that I want all of us to touch, and all of us, Junior and Jay Hill. I also want you guys' 2 cents on this. But so look, Joe. Triple J, his contract is expiring next year. His contract is
right.
over. It is over next year. And honestly, man, look, Triple J he's a great player. He's a unicorn. He's extremely talented. But one of the biggest things that we say here on Clutch Talk all the time, and I'll even let my brothers go ahead and finish the line for me. But brothers, what is the best type of ability?
Availability.
Exactly. So that is something that we are always saying over here on Clutch Talk, right? And Jaren isn't the most available player. No, since his rookie year, he hasn't even played more than 60 games in a single season, which can be concerning. It could be concerning because those were also the same signs of concern that we were seeing in Joel Embiid his first couple of years in the league. And we see, Joel Embiid's a great player, but every year he can never get through the season and the playoffs. So to you, talk to me first about how you feel about Triple J, and can you trust him to get through the entire season? And when his contract is up, would you personally want to offer him less money because of that health issue?
I was about to say it kind of worked out for Joel Embiid, right? It worked out okay for him. I think that Jaren Jackson Jr. has the potential to be one of the most unique players in the entire NBA. You could argue he's already there in terms of his ability to defend the rim, shoot the three, create off the dribble. He's essentially a big 6'11" wing who plays the role of a big man. So there's not many Jaren Jackson Jr.'s in the NBA. And, we mentioned earlier, the way that you build a team when you're in a small market like Memphis is by the draft and trades. So my counter to you guys when it comes to his contract would be, if you're not spending that money on Jaren, who are you spending it on? Who are you realistically going to bring into Memphis while using Jaren as trade bait? Because you'd have to trade him. It doesn't make sense to let him walk in restricted free agency. Like, does Jaren and a bunch of filler and draft picks get you Ben Simmons? Maybe. But if it does, what does John Ben Simmons look like as a team? That's a good question.
Not very
good. And I think that's Jaren Jackson Jr. in theory is the perfect big man complement to Ja Morant, big who can play on the perimeter and do things as a shooter when Ja is most effective attacking the rim and dishing out on dribble penetration. So they complement each other so well. And I think the Grizzlies really want Jaren to work out. And they want him to prove that he can work out. Obviously, they have him in restricted free agency. They can tender him an offer. Jaren's not going anywhere in the immediate future, even if they don't decide to re-sign him this offseason. But they want to see him stay healthy. I agree with your greatest ability being availability. I think that's a very fair point. But again, if you're not bringing back Jaren, what are you getting in exchange for that cap space, for that use of draft capital? And if the answer is not as good as Jaren Jackson Jr., then you roll the dice and you hope that he works out and stays healthy. But they understandably so want to see him do it first before they commit over $100 million to him over 4 or 5 years.
Anybody outside of John Marin who's untouchable to you?
Maybe Jaren. Again,
okay.
Does Ben Simmons
depends what you get
move
back?
The needle?
Yeah.
Probably not. If for some reason I can't even think of a realistic option. Bradley Beal. But then again, Bradley Beal is 27 years old, or 28. Bradley Beal doesn't necessarily fit the timeline of being that great star next to Ja. So, I don't know that there's a player or a name that makes a ton of sense to move on from Jaren for. So, Ja is untouchable.
That's what I was going to ask. Is he already untouchable?
So I think so. I would not trade John Morant simply because you have him, again, for restricted free agency purposes. As long as you keep him happy, you have him under team control for 6 years. So that's a pretty big, valuable piece to have. Jaren, you have restricted free agency rights on, of course, and then Brandon Clark as well. Brandon Clark was once viewed as an untouchable, depending on some of the folks that I talked to in the league about it. And he obviously had a down second year, and maybe that's not as necessarily true as it was in the past. I would say Ja is 100% untouchable. And then, you can't even say 100% because if the Bucks came and said, we'll give you Giannis. I'll take the, one of the greatest talents in the history of the NBA, sure. But realistically, Ja is untouchable. Jaren is probably untouchable, but for the right deal, I'd listen. And then everybody else beyond that, Desmond Bane is on a great value contract, but would you really not include him in a trade to upgrade at that position? I think they would. So outside of Ja and maybe Jaren, I'm not sure there is an untouchable on the roster, but those are obviously two pretty big names for the Grizzlies.
So I know you brought up Ben Simmons, and I know that, if somehow a deal were to be possible for Ben Simmons involving Triple J, that Ja and Ben Simmons team looks a little weird. But for other realistic targets, perhaps a Pascal Siakam, would you be comfortable moving Would you be comfortable moving Jaren Jackson for a player like Pascal Siakam?
Not really. Again, because it's not a knock on Pascal Siakam. Like, I'm not the irrational Grizzlies fan saying Jaren Jackson Jr. is better than Siakam. Like, that's not true. Obviously, Siakam is better right now, but it doesn't fit their timeline. I just know what their timeline is. I know that they are not trying to get better right now.
Right.
Would Siakam make them better right now? Yes. Would Ben Simmons, even if it included Jaren, make them better right now? I think it would, because Simmons is such a good defender and he can do so many things in terms of getting to the basket. But the long-term fit doesn't make a ton of sense with either of those guys in terms of what they're trying to do. I think the best bet is to try to get Jaren Jackson Jr. right and see what he can be when he is available, or if he's even able to be available. If he gets hurt again, then the answer kind of comes naturally, right? And they move on just because they can't count on him to stay healthy. But if he stays healthy and he has a most improved player-esque kind of season, which I think he's capable of when healthy, then, you shell out the max contract and you think you've got your two stars going into a pretty big 2022 offseason where the Memphis Grizzlies are going to be able to do a lot of different things because of expiring contracts, the 3 first-round picks they have in that draft. Next offseason could be a pretty busy one, even more busy than this one has been for Memphis. And this has been a pretty busy one.
Yeah.
So,
go ahead, Jahil. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So real quick, Joe. So just in terms of 2021, you're 22 next, so upcoming season,
right?
You're Taylor Jenkins. Who do you have, in your starting lineup? You mentioned Brandon Clark, and that was someone I had a question about. If you had talked about Jaren Jackson playing at the 5, would he slide into the 4? What does your starting lineup look like for next year and kind of the second unit?
I think that you can have a a starting Steven Adams without a finishing Steven Adams, if that makes sense. So I don't know that Steven Adams closes games for Memphis, but I think he will start them. So I would say it's going to be John Morant. I hope it's Desmond Bane because I'm a Desmond Bane guy. If it's the Anthony Melton, I understand that too. That would be cool. But I'm thinking it'll be Desmond Bane, given the way Taylor Jenkins has done his lineups in the past. Dillon Brooks at the 3. I think it'll be Jaren Jackson at the 4, and then Steven Adams at the 5. And that's how I think it'll be in terms of starters. Brandon Clark will obviously be a big piece of that. The Anthony Melton will be a part of that. Kyle Anderson will be a part of that. And again, those are 3 guys coming off the bench. Like that could be a pretty strong bench unit for the Grizzlies. We haven't talked about Tyus Jones, who is probably very much on the trade block right now, but he's still on the roster as we have this conversation. So if Tyus Jones is still around, that's Tyus Jones, DeAnthony Melton, Kyle Anderson, Brandon Clark. They're still pretty deep, even after all the trades they've made and all the transactions and moves they've done. Zaire Williams, you can make a realistic argument, is the 11th best player on this team. And that's okay. He doesn't need to be better than that right now. Memphis has put themselves in a position where they can stay competitive in the here and now and still be able to develop a player like Williams, who theoretically brings that ceiling that much higher over the next few seasons. So I think the starters will be Morant, Bane, Brooks, Jackson, and Adams. I don't think that's how games will close, but I do think that's how they'll begin.
So what's your closing lineup? I mean, I guess it does depend on the game, but in general.
Sure. I think in general you replace Adams with Anderson. That's probably what I would do. So you got
and then
Morant,
move Triple J to the 5.
Brooks. Yeah, Anderson at the 4 and Jaren at the 5. And that gives you more playmaking. Anderson showed a much improved ability to shoot the 3 last year. So again, you got Bane, you got Brooks, you got arguably all 4 of those 5 guys can shoot the 3. And then you got John Morant, who you hope can shoot the 3. But you've got 4 guys on the perimeter that can shoot 3s. John Morant creating off dribble penetration and on drive and dish kickouts to guys in the corner and above the break. That's a pretty effective offense. So I'm thinking that'll be how they close. Okay. They'll start with Adams, I would imagine, but they'll finish out, I would hope, with Anderson because he's one of their better players, and that gives them a lot of versatility, especially in the front court.
Yeah, absolutely. Joe, I really like your starting lineup and your ending lineup. But here, Joe, as we start to wrap it up here,
sure.
some questions that we like to ask here at the end is, barring injury, we can't call for injuries. We don't know how that's going to happen. Hopefully we don't have another crazy season like the COVID season last year. But barring all that, if you guys have a healthy team, where do you think the Grizzlies finish? And then how deep do you guys go in the playoffs if you do make the playoffs?
I think they'll finish right around where they did this past season. I think they'll be in the 9th and 10th seed conversation. I think they'll make the play-in. I just think this year they'll lose. The Pelicans will be a little bit more desperate if they're in the 7 or 8 seed spot. You'll have one of those teams like Portland or like Dallas that'll be in that 7 seed conversation. And, they're going to be better than the Grizzlies. So I think that Memphis will make the play-in again. I just think they'll lose this time. And there are going to be Grizzlies fans that lose their minds, and they're going to think that's terrible and awful. And, oh my God, they're going backwards. But progress isn't linear. You can get better as a franchise and get better as a team and not have the same record or not have the same playoff positioning. And I think they're committed to that vision. I thought that maybe they would push in some chips a little bit more with their overachieving of last season. That's not the case. They've gone in the opposite direction. You could argue they've gotten worse. I don't know that they've gotten worse. I just don't think they've gotten better. And as the other teams in the West, especially the Pelicans, actively do their best to improve, naturally, you're taking that outward improvement from New Orleans and you're trying to match that up with the internal development of the Grizzlies. If the Grizzlies are going to make the playoffs, they need Jaren Jackson Jr. to be almost an all-star level player. I'm not sure he's capable of doing that just yet, but I do think he will be better. I think Memphis will continue to compete in the same manner that they have the last couple of years. I just think that this time, instead of winning the play-in like they did in 2020, 2021, they'll lose. I could see them losing to the Pelicans or somebody along those lines, and they'll head into the 2022 offseason with similar questions to the ones we're asking now, just in terms of how they're going to use that cap space, how they're going to use those draft picks. It's highly unlikely they drafted at all 3 spots. They're going to be busy again. But in terms of season predictions as they come out, I think I'm going to predict Memphis to be the 9 or 10 seed, but to lose in the play-in.
Okay. And then last question that we like to ask here is Joe, as a Grizzlies fan, if you could give us one word or one phrase to describe both about how you felt about last season, and then one word or one phrase to describe about how you feel about this upcoming season, 2021-2022.
Pleasant surprise for 2020, 2021. I really enjoyed that play-in run. I really enjoyed the series against the Jazz. Extremely valuable playoff experience and postseason experience for such a young team. I think for this coming season, it needs to be, delayed gratification is probably the phrase that fans are going to have to get used to. They are not interested in cashing in any chips, any draft picks, any salary cap space in the name of immediate improvement. They are concerned about getting better in the long term, at least according to their vision of what the long term looks like. And that can be frustrating for fans. But I do think that they have an idea of where they're going and what they want to be years from now. And they are not going to deviate from that path. So it might hurt your immediate enjoyment of postseason basketball if you're a Grizzlies fan. But I do think in the long run, it'll be valuable and successful as long as the team can maintain that vision.
Okay. And Joe, here, one thing that we like to do here at Clutch Talk, we like to do a little closing segment here called Guess the Player. This is how Guess the Player works, Joe. I have 3 players here listed. You, Jay Hill, and Junior. You guys each have two guesses to guess the player that I'm talking about. I have here a couple of accolades that they did, things that they were known for, and just things that they did. You ready to run some Guess the Player for this closing segment?
Oh my goodness, you're putting me on the spot here, but yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's do it here, guys. All right. So the first player we have here, this guy is a 2-time NBA MVP, a 1-time NBA steals leader, a 4-time All-NBA first team member, a 1-time skills challenge champion, a franchise leader in points and assists, a 7-time All-Star. Okay. He's a 4-time NBA free throw percentage.
Steve Nash.
No, it's not Steve Nash.
Is this Steph Curry?
It is Steph Curry. There you go. There you go, Jay Hill. How you gonna mess that up? You
Jay Hill can't be messing that up.
Wow.
All right. Here we go. All right. Next player we got here. This guy, he played for 8 teams. He is Mr. Florida. He's a 1-time slam dunk champion. Okay. He's a 2-time gold medalist. He's a 1-time rookie of the year.
Vince Carter.
Yes, sir. Okay, Junior.
I was close to Vince Carter. I needed one more to guess Vince Carter. That was good. Well done.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and get into this last player. This guy, he brought the Eurostep to the NBA.
Manu Ginobili.
Yes, sir.
He started off with the.
That was a great hint to start with.
I started off with the first one. Started off, man. Okay, man. This is a good place for us to go ahead and here and wrap it up. Joe, man, we really, all of us, man, from the bottom of my heart, just want to thank you very much for coming on here and talking some Grizzlies with us, man. Like, you really blessed us. You really a lot of knowledge. And for all the fans, man, I want to make sure that all the fans, or you guys listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, you guys go check out Joe and his articles, man. So Joe, you got any last words to say before we check off here?
I appreciate you guys for having me. I've been doing this a long time now, and it's really cool to see younger guys that are really passionate about it and that sort of thing. And I'm very happy for y'all to have this show. And anything you guys ever need, you let me know. I'm happy to do it. And I'm grateful to still be churning along as the old blogger mule that I like to call myself over at grizzlybearblues.com. We have a great team, and hopefully whenever folks want to learn something about the Memphis Grizzlies, they'll head to grizzlybearblues.com.
Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joe. Appreciate you coming on. It was a lot of fun to have you on here. Very knowledgeable guy, and looking forward to next time.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
Absolutely.
you, Joe. Appreciate it.
Anything y'all need, you let me know. Happy to do it.
Thank you, man. We out here, y'all. Clutch Talk out.